Amid the ashes of an empire that once dominated Europe, the old propaganda loudspeakers seemed to linger in the air. Their echoes were faint yet persistent, like a cold reminder of the invisible power of words. In the history of brutal wars, people often remember Adolf Hitler as the one who gave the orders, and Heinrich Himmler as the hand that carried them out. Yet there was another figure mentioned less often but far more dangerous and subtle. He did not hold a gun. He did not issue commands to kill. With words and images alone, he convinced millions that lies were truth and that crime was glory. That man was Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda of the Third Reich, who turned the entire nation of Germany into a vast stage where truth was burned away and falsehood was crowned. Goebbels was not the architect of bombs and shells, but the architect of collective illusion. He demonstrated that in every war, controlling the human mind can be more frightening than controlling weapons. A nation once praised for intelligence and discipline could be led down a path of destruction through carefully arranged phrases without a single bullet. This was the deepest lesson he left to history. Propaganda was not merely a tool that supported war. It was a weapon capable of turning people into instruments of their own fear and blind pride. He became one of the clearest examples of the 20th century, showing that whoever controls the narrative can control the soul of a nation. Goebbels, often called the Wizard of Words, did not need falling bombs or exploding shells. He only needed belief, and with that belief he persuaded millions of Germans to trust, to love, and to sacrifice in the name of a great fatherland, a fatherland that he himself helped construct from beautifully decorated lies. If you feel the weight of historical stories like this, please give us a like and subscribe to the Silent Frontlines channel, and join us in exploring the deeper shadows of wars fought in silence. To understand the man who transformed words into the sharpest weapon of the Third Reich, we must look deeply into his origins. Joseph Goebbels was born in a small German town. From childhood, he carried a deformity in his leg that made every step uneven. In a society that increasingly worshipped the image of the healthy, perfect, and pure Aryan ideal, Goebbels appeared as an outsider, fragile and surrounded by contemptuous glances. Yet behind that imperfect body was a sharp intellect and an intense hunger for knowledge. He pursued education, earned a doctorate in literature, and once dreamed of becoming a great writer. His pages were filled with ambition, but publishers repeatedly rejected his work. These failures pushed him into deep depression and ignited a burning resentment toward a world he believed was unjust and decaying from within. These personal insecurities, rather than suppressing him, became a smouldering flame that fueled limitless ambition. Goebbels refused the fate of a rejected man. He longed to prove that his mind could compensate for and even surpass any physical imperfection. His private pain soon merged dangerously with the collective suffering of a nation. Germany, after the First World War, sank into continuous crisis. Unemployment spread widely, inflation soared, and a heavy sense of humiliation followed the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. A people once proud of discipline and intellect now felt betrayed, stripped of status and future. In such a climate, individuals like Goebbels, carrying unhealed personal wounds, began searching for a savior, a voice that could turn despair into strength. Goebbels became a classic product of a dangerous formula often seen in history, the combination of personal failure and collective crisis. It was not only the tragedy of one individual, but fertile ground for extreme ideologies. He was not violent by instinct. He was driven toward fanaticism by his own pain and intellect. Then came a decisive moment. When he encountered the writings and speeches of Adolf Hitler, Goebbels believed he had found the light he had long sought in the surrounding darkness. He saw Hitler as the prophet of a new era, the man who could lead Germany out of humiliation and restore its rightful position. From that point forward, his life became completely bound to Hitler. Their connection was not only political, it carried the tone of fanatic belief, a devotion that lasted 2 decades and shaped the fate of a nation. From those years, the seed of the Wizard of Words was planted. A man once scorned for his physical imperfection discovered how to conquer the minds of millions through what he had been denied perfection in speech and the power of belief. It was the beginning of a journey that would later make all of Europe shudder. After finding in Adolf Hitler the leader he had long desired, Joseph Goebbels quickly joined the Nazi Party and became one of its most active figures. With sharp language skills and a cold intellect, he soon attracted Hitler's attention and trust. Hitler realized he had found something every leader needs: a loyal and persuasive loudspeaker. He sent Goebbels to Berlin, the vibrant political center, and also the most difficult place for the Nazi Party to expand its influence. There, Goebbels began constructing a propaganda system of unprecedented scale and sophistication. He did not only write speeches, he also designed countless leaflets, short slogans, concise and decisive, easy to engrave in the mind. These words were not meant to persuade through reason. They directly targeted emotion, fear of an uncertain future, wounded national pride, and the desire to belong to something greater than oneself. Goebbels understood that people often act not because of logical arguments, but because of what they feel deep inside. He became the speechwriter for Hitler, turning the leader's rough ideas into powerful and moving addresses. At the same time, Goebbels personally directed massive rallies where tens of thousands gathered under blazing torches with flags waving and chants echoing. Every event was carefully calculated like a grand theatrical production. Light, sound, rhythm of slogans, everything was designed to create collective excitement, blurring the boundary between individual and crowd. From those days, Goebbels grasped a core principle that later became the foundation of the entire propaganda machine of the Third Reich. Truth was less important than making people believe what was being said. He turned language into a sharp weapon, and human emotion into the most effective tool of control. Instead of debating reason, he chose to manipulate the heart and instinct. This marked a crucial shift from scattered manual propaganda to a systematically organized structure, what could be called the industrialization of lies. This model later became a costly lesson, studied and applied by other regimes in major conflicts. Goebbels addressed Hitler with the title Führer, the Supreme Leader, and described himself as the loudspeaker of the empire. From a man once scorned for his physical defect, he rose to become one of the regime's most dangerous instruments. Through talent and fanatic devotion, Goebbels not only spread Nazi ideology but gradually shaped how millions of Germans perceived reality. He turned Berlin into a living laboratory for the art of manipulating minds, and what he built there would later expand across all of Germany. From this foundation, a colossal propaganda machine was forming. It used no ammunition, yet possessed the power to transform an entire nation. After the propaganda machine had been firmly established in Berlin, and shortly after Adolf Hitler took power, the first flames of the new regime did not rise on the battlefield. Instead, they burned in the intellectual heart of Germany. At Opera Square, now called Bebelplatz, in front of Humboldt University, once a symbol of the Enlightenment spirit, a crowd of students, soldiers, and citizens gathered around a massive pile of wood. Tens of thousands of books were stacked together. Under flickering torches, Joseph Goebbels stepped onto a temporary stage, his brown coat standing out in the darkness. With a cold yet compelling voice, he declared that the era of Jewish intellectualism had officially ended, and that the German Revolution was opening the way for a new spirit, a purely German spirit. That night, more than 25 books by great figures such as Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, and Erich Maria Remarque were thrown into the fire one after another. Pages curled and burned in the night wind. Each rising flame did not only consume words, it destroyed part of humanity's intellectual heritage. Goebbels did not see this as destruction. He called it a necessary ritual of purification. To him, ideas he considered wrong were more dangerous than any military enemy. The night at Bebelplatz was not merely a book burning. It was a declaration of war against independent thought itself. From that moment, the German people were gradually stripped of the right to think differently, read differently, and speak differently. When they stopped accessing free knowledge, they were left only to listen. And when they could only listen, they would easily follow what the regime wanted them to believe. Goebbels turned a barbaric act into a sacred national symbol. He ordered the entire event to be filmed and widely distributed in cinemas across the country. In each frame, the flames blazed. Swastika flags waved and crowds cheered. Everything was staged to transform shame into pride and guilt into noble ritual. This was the propaganda art he pursued, not only controlling information but manipulating emotion and collective memory. The Night of Bebelplatz became the birth ritual of a regime of total mental control. It opened the path for future steps, where words and images were continuously used to justify increasingly tight control over the thoughts and behavior of an entire nation. That flame never truly went out. It smoldered for the next 12 years, spreading and burning not only books but also the cultural foundation, humanity, and critical thinking of a nation once praised for its intellect. From this point, propaganda was no longer a supporting tool. It became the core foundation of power, a sacred fire that Goebbels would continue to fuel, illuminating the path for an empire rising in darkness. From the flames at Bebelplatz, Joseph Goebbels did not stop at isolated symbols. He quickly transformed propaganda into a system of total control over the national spirit. With the establishment of the Ministry of Propaganda, he held the power to dominate nearly every form of media and art in Germany. Newspapers, radio, cinema, theatre, music, no field escaped his strict supervision. Independent newspapers were gradually shut down. Independent journalists either fell silent or were removed. All news was carefully selected, edited, and distributed according to the line of the Führer. Each day, the German people heard only a single voice repeating the same message. Again and again, Germany was rising again under wise leadership. Goebbels did not see propaganda as merely delivering information. To him, it became a new religion of the modern age. Hitler was presented as an immortal figure, while Goebbels placed himself in the role of a high priest. He understood that controlling a nation required more than logic or force. It required reaching the subconscious and stirring emotion. He therefore used artistic tools with precision, the bright colours of flags, the powerful rhythm of marching music, the dazzling lights of nighttime gatherings, and carefully planted fear. All of these blended together to create a state of collective fanaticism where individual reason slowly faded. He called this process Gleichschaltung, the synchronization of minds. The goal was not to persuade people, but to make them think alike, speak alike, and believe alike. Each mass rally was staged like a vast theatrical performance. Torches burned brightly, drums thundered, flags waved. Tens of thousands of voices chanted prepared slogans. In those moments, the individual dissolved into the crowd. People were no longer spectators. They unknowingly became actors in a vast unfolding tragedy. Through these campaigns, Goebbels also intensified anti-Jewish propaganda. Slogans, posters, films, stage plays, every medium was mobilized to portray a group of people as the source of misfortune, as parasites on the body of the nation. The message was repeated constantly from morning to night, from the streets to the screen, until it seeped into the subconscious and became part of shared belief. Goebbels carried out a frightening historical experiment. He effectively programmed the mind of a nation known for intelligence and discipline. This reflected his own philosophy. When you want people to believe something untrue, make them feel it. Without immediate violence, by skillfully guiding emotion, a nation could voluntarily accept and even enthusiastically support things they would otherwise fear. From this point, Germany entered an era of blind belief, where lies were decorated with grandeur, and truth was buried beneath carefully staged words and images. The machine Goebbels built did not only control information, it shaped how people perceived reality itself. Within the comprehensive propaganda system that Joseph Goebbels constructed, cinema received special attention and became his favorite weapon. He directly supervised the entire German film industry from script writing to the final shot. No film, whether documentary or entertainment, was allowed to be screened without strict approval. Every frame had to serve one purpose: glorify the empire, elevate the image of the leader, and spread negative portrayals of groups targeted by the regime. Goebbels once stated that a good propaganda film was worth more than 100 speeches. He clearly understood the unique power of images. They could penetrate the human mind more deeply than words alone. The camera lens, in his view, was the eye of Germany. Through that eye, he wanted the entire nation to see only a carefully staged version of reality. One of Goebbels's darkest and most sophisticated projects was a film produced in 1000, 942 inches, the Warsaw Ghetto. On screen, viewers saw images of a chaotic and filthy community where people fought, deceived, and treated each other cruelly. Few realized that every scene was staged. Real individuals were forced to repeat scenes multiple times according to the filmmaker's instructions. Posture, lighting, camera angles, clothing, everything was arranged meticulously to create a fabricated picture of social decay. The production team consisted entirely of German personnel, and the sole aim was to evoke disgust, contempt, and fear. In this way, Goebbels turned cinema into a powerful tool for generating artificial emotion. Images did not merely tell stories. They directly stirred fear and hostility in viewers. Once these emotions were awakened, the line between truth and fiction blurred. Ordinary Germans, sitting in dark theaters, found it difficult to distinguish reality from carefully designed narrative. Film, combined with newspapers and radio, formed a closed information system that made lies appear more convincing than truth. Such films did more than deceive audiences. They performed a more dangerous task. They helped legitimize actions taking place in distant concentration camps. By portraying a group as the source of misfortune and decay, cinema contributed to making extreme measures seem necessary, even reasonable. This became one of the most subtle and frightening crimes in the history of war. Not direct force, but images guiding a nation to accept and support wrongdoing. Goebbels elevated art into a tool for controlling emotion at the highest level. He did not simply make films. He constructed an entire artificial reality that millions believed to be truth. And that artificial reality prepared the psychological ground for some of the darkest chapters in European history. When propaganda films had already penetrated deeply into the minds of the people, the first gunshots echoed across Europe. The Second World War erupted, and Joseph Goebbels's propaganda machine entered its most intense and sophisticated phase. From the beginning, Goebbels portrayed every German military advance as legitimate self-defense. The invasion of Poland, and later the lightning campaign into France, were described as necessary measures to protect the fatherland from external threats. On radio broadcasts and in news bulletins, he repeatedly emphasized that Germany was not the aggressor but merely responding to forces seeking to destroy the German nation. Early victories were celebrated loudly, creating an atmosphere of excitement and confidence that the war would soon end in glorious triumph. In 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, Goebbels once again demonstrated his skill. He described the conflict not as an invasion, but as a holy crusade against the Red Danger from the East, a barbaric force threatening the entire civilization of Europe. Fear was carefully stirred, transforming a brutal war into a sacred mission for the German people. Propaganda spread everywhere in newspapers, posters, theaters, and streets, convincing millions of Germans that if they did not destroy the enemy, they themselves would be destroyed. However, as easy victories faded and battlefield reality grew harsher, Goebbels' role became more crucial than ever. By the winter of 1942, the catastrophe at Stalingrad unfolded. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were surrounded, slowly dying from cold and hunger. Desperate messages from the front lines poured into Berlin. Instead of admitting defeat, Goebbels launched an unprecedented propaganda campaign. In February 1943, at the Berlin Sport Palace, before thousands in attendance and millions listening by radio, Joseph Goebbels raised his voice dramatically. He asked, "Do you want total war? Do you want a war more radical than anything imaginable?" The crowd responded with a thunderous shout, "Yes." The echo rolled across Germany. In that moment, while the empire was already burning and German forces suffered heavy losses, the total war speech transformed despair into artificial hope, turning defeat into motivation to continue fighting. This marked the peak of wartime propaganda. The ability to turn defeat into motivation, fear into strength, and maintain morale for both army and civilians, even as everything collapsed. Goebbels skillfully shifted propaganda from the image of easy victory to a holy struggle for survival, and finally to despair, transformed into blind hope. This technique later became a lesson, studied in later conflicts. Even as Berlin began to sink into flames, Goebbels continued to speak of coming victory and the light of the Führer. He knew the truth was breaking apart, yet he persisted, using words to keep the flame of belief from going out. While calls for total war still echoed, battlefield reality could no longer be hidden. Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich, was dying. From the east, Soviet forces poured into the city with unstoppable strength. From the west, Allied artillery roared continuously. The sky no longer carried chants or marching music, only explosions and rising columns of black smoke. Amid the ruins, Joseph Goebbels remained. While thousands of officers and officials sought escape, he chose to stay beside his leader until the final moment. Together with his wife Magda Goebbels and their 6 young children, he sheltered in the Führer bunker beneath central Berlin. Underground darkness pressed in. The air was heavy. Despair filled every corner. A place, once at the center of power, had become the final refuge of those witnessing an empire collapse. On 30 April 1945, Adolf Hitler ended his life with a gunshot. Before his death, he named Joseph Goebbels Chancellor of Germany in his final testament. That highest title lasted only one day. The following day, Goebbels realized everything was truly over. Soviet troops were only a few blocks away. He refused all suggestions of surrender. For him, a world without Hitler was not worth living. Magda Goebbels shared that absolute belief. In a small room underground, Magda quietly poisoned the 6 children. One by one, they fell asleep, still wearing white nightclothes. Goebbels stood there, offering no resistance, shedding no tears, only the cold silence of blind loyalty. Afterwards, the couple climbed out of the bunker into the courtyard above the Chancellery ruins. Goebbels drew his pistol. A single dry shot sounded. Following prior instructions, German soldiers poured fuel over their bodies and set them on fire to prevent capture. The flames burned only partially. When Soviet troops arrived, they found 2 half-burned, distorted bodies, the final remains of the man who once shaped the minds of a nation. Inside the bunker, the 6 children lay motionless on their beds, their faces peaceful as if asleep. No one could recognize them as the descendants of the man who had unleashed the most powerful wave of propaganda in modern history. Absolute loyalty drove Goebbels to destroy his own family, an extreme and tragic proof of the power of the illusion he had created and sustained for years. The death of Joseph Goebbels was not the end of a story. It was a clear demonstration that propaganda, when pushed to its extreme, can destroy even its creator. Everything he had built, words, images, fanatic belief, frenzied crowds, collapsed completely in the smoke and ashes of Berlin. The truth he had buried beneath grand deception finally returned cold and undeniable. After the final gunshots fell silent and the smoke gradually cleared from the sky over Berlin, the world began to look back and better understand the role of Joseph Goebbels in the tragedy of the Third Reich. Historians later described him as the dark brain of the Nazi regime, a man who was intelligent and well-educated, yet used that intellect to strip millions of others of their reason. Without Goebbels, Adolf Hitler might have remained only a fanatic with fiery speeches but limited reach. It was Goebbels, with his talent for turning words into weapons and images into tools of emotional manipulation, who elevated Hitler into a figure blindly worshipped by an entire nation. Today, the place that once housed the Führer bunker, the final shelter of Goebbels and Hitler, is nothing more than an ordinary parking lot in modern Berlin. There is no monument, no memorial plaque, no visible trace to remind visitors of what happened there. Berlin seems to have deliberately buried that memory deep underground, as if to suggest that sometimes the most frightening figure in history is not the one who gives orders, but the one who makes the world believe in those orders. The legacy of Goebbels does not lie in buildings or military victories. It lies in the profound lesson about the enduring power of propaganda. In every war across all eras, whoever controls the narrative, whoever shapes how people perceive reality, often determines who becomes the hero, who becomes the enemy, who wins, and who loses. Words and images can transform lies into religion, turn crimes into sacred duty, and turn people into actors unaware that they are performing in a tragedy written by someone else. The shadow of Joseph Goebbels still lingers quietly in our time. Whenever sophisticated information campaigns are staged, whenever collective emotion rises stronger than reason, whenever truth is distorted to serve a larger purpose, the warning from the past becomes clear. A civilized nation can be led toward destruction by carefully arranged words and images alone. Goebbels demonstrated that propaganda is not merely a tool supporting war. It is a weapon capable of shaping the fate of humanity itself. And that lesson, though painful, remains relevant for every generation that follows. If you are exploring historical figures and the lessons of past wars, please like this video and subscribe to the Silent Frontlines channel so you do not miss future detailed analyses.